Welcome back to the Bearded Butcher's YouTube channel. Today, we've got another fun one. This one is gonna be a bison cutting diagram video. We have a half of a bison hanging here in our cooler. We butchered this one. We raised it right here on our farm in Creston, Ohio. And hanging, you have the hind quarter, you have the front quarter, you have all these middle meats. We're gonna break this thing down, we're gonna get it on our table, and we're gonna show you the entire process. You guys have enjoyed our cutting diagram series. We did a beef, we did a pig, we did a lamb, we did a deer. You've been asking for bison, and here it is. So for over 30 years, our bison have been rolling out of this cooler on this rail, and it looked exactly like it looks now. If it hadn't been for bison, you would not have seen 1 minute of the Bearded Butchers on YouTube. Our father began raising bison in the late 80s. He brought them here to be butchered prior to us owning the shop. This is our 30th year of owning White Feather Meats, which was previously White Feather Bison Company. Became White Feather Meats when we bought the butcher shop, or our father bought the butcher shop in June of 1994. So for over 30 years, our buffalo have been coming across this rail, and for nearly 30 years, we have been also the butchers, not just the ranchers of the bison. One more thing about bison, and the reason are the cornerstone of our business, and one of the reasons why we love them so much. Bison are our Native American bovine. So they're the beef that's native to this continent. They're perfectly created and built for almost the entire United States. Climate doesn't affect them. They're very good at using the resources of pasture and prairie. And then what you get is this beautiful, tender, sweet tasting beef, essentially, that is kind of like a regular European grain-fed beef, but also kind of like an elk, also a little bit like a deer. It's like the perfect marriage of all of our favorite species into one animal, the great American bison. Next step to this process, we've got to get the bison front quarter down on our table, bison hind quarter down on our table, and then we're going to get our diagram started with our tape. So Scott's going to muscle the front quarter over, and we're going to get started. The entire half, the combination of the two added together, is 349 pounds. 349 pounds of hanging weight. Come towards me. Yep. Ready. Oh. Front quarter's on the table. Now it's time for the hind. Break it down. Bison hind quarters are significantly smaller than the front quarter, as you can see. They carry a lot of that weight up there in that front, in that hump area. But broke down between the 13th and 14th rib. It's pretty interesting on bison. There's 14 ribs in this whole section. On beef, there's only 13. So something for you to learn today. This is broke down between the 13th and 14th. That separates the hind quarter from the front quarter. So there's an entire half of bison. We're gonna get it taped out, and then we're gonna start cutting it. So it's pretty interesting.
when we laid this bison down on the table, how much room it took up on the table compared to the beef half that we laid down when we did our beef diagrams. Just interesting because they're just so much larger. We mentioned how much smaller the hindquarter is in the front on bison. So we're actually gonna put this on the scale because we wanna see
how strong Scott is.
Yeah, we wanna see what the difference is in weight between those two pieces. So
143.50.
That's the hindquarter.
Ready? Yeah. Ready? Yeah. Bison carry a lot of weight up in their front shoulders.
You guys carried off inside of beef like
I know.
How many yards?
195.25.
Do the math quick, Scott.
I learned not to do that. I'm gonna add them together, and then it won't equal 349 because we'll have some evaporation loss in the week that this was in the cooler dry aging.
So 195.25 minus 143.50. 51.75 pound difference between the front and hind. Pretty cool.
We'll add those two together.
143.50 plus 195.25, 338.75. So we lost 11-ish pounds.
Minus 3.4, minus 349.
We lost 10.25 pounds in the cooler, so we can figure out the percentage, but 10.25 pounds of shrinkage, moisture shrinkage from the dry aging process. Talking knives real quick before we get started processing on this bison in today's video, which we use these almost nearly every single day here at the shop. But this is a 10-inch Victorinox breaking knife, an 8-inch Victorinox breaking knife, and of course our trusty 6-inch semi-stiff boning knife with our Bearded Butcher logo on it. So we get a lot of questions about knives, and those are the three that we're going to be using just like every other day. Let's just get started. So I already made a cut here between the 5th and 6th rib. That's where we break the chuck portion down from the rib portion. So we're just going to continue finishing this cut through that chuck. And then we grab our handsaw and we're going to break these two apart. Just remember, this video isn't necessarily going to be a how-to explanation of every individual cut, primal and cut. It's going to be more of the explanation of when it goes to the table. So we're going to get it cut. Scott's going to lay it out on the table. And yeah, just like you saw in the other diagram videos.
Okay, I'll bet the audience would like to see what Seth and I weigh. You want to do that? We can take a little, put a little seat down here on the scale.
You do have to remember that I'm wearing chainmail, so it's not going to be a fair
And boots and stuff.
and a fair, yeah.
Well, I'm wearing boots too. If you look,
Well, yeah.
feet.
So I feel
You're
like
saying the overall
I
weight.
feel like to do this properly, you have to go get Josh's chainmail and at least hold it while
I
you weigh
agree.
yourself.
I agree. I'll be
Okay.
right back. We do a lot of carcass weights. So now the question is, what do these carcasses weigh? So we're going to find out. Seth's wearing chainmail, so I grabbed a set of chainmail. I've otherwise dressed similarly.
I've also been doing carnivore all the whole month of January, bud.
We're going to find out. Now, I am a little taller, so we're going to find out. What's your guess? Who weighs more? Do we weigh over 200 pounds? The whole bit.
let's
Do
see
we
what
weigh as much as a beef? What's it say?
225.25. 225.25.
Oh, 217. Well, here, hold that.
Yeah.
There you go. A little bit of about 8-pound difference. I think
Of course,
that's in the
that's
in the
with our
height.
clothes on, so we're going to keep
Are
those
you
on.
suggesting something?
No, we're going to keep those on to wear ourselves, and boots. Just starting on this rib portion. We're going to pull the skirt steak out. This is the outside. We'll pull the outside skirt, inside skirt. We're going to cut some ribeye steaks. All kinds of cool stuff. Bison short ribs. This is the bison inside skirt steak. And it's located right here on this plate. So we want to get the membrane removed there. And we just follow the seam all the way down. Bison's a lot stickier than beef, so you're going to see through this process that we may almost struggle a little bit just because of the stickiness. It's just real tacky. So there's the inside skirt, and this one is the outside. So there you have bison inside skirt and a bison outside skirt. So now what we do, this is the outside. We just roll these up. We'll put those in a package. This is the inside, and that's the outside bison skirt steaks. Get these added to our table. Bison rib section. These feather bones, these on the back of these are so long because of that hump on the bison, and they're like razor sharp because they're so thin. You gotta be real careful that you don't cut yourself. Something the butchers never want to talk about is cutting themselves, but you try so hard not to cut yourself with your knife, and then you go and do it on one of those sharp bones. Get this lifter meat, this fat cap off of here. And then we'll cut this whole section into some bison ribeye steaks. Now we remove this yellow cord. A lot of people want to know what this yellow cord is. This is what the animal uses to lift up its head, move its head and neck, also known as the patty whack. I'll pull this membrane off of here. Now we want to remove these back ribs. So if I left these on this would be rib steaks, but since I'm taking it off, they're rib eyes. So rib eye steaks. That's your bison back ribs. This is your rib eye section that we're going to cut into some steaks. So I have a little butcher's tip for you. Scott likes to call it Scott's hot tip. This is Seth's hot tip. You can see on bison, things are kind of sloppy just because it's leaner. So it's harder to cut these and keep your cuts precise and consistent in thickness. So what we do is we put these on a tray, we flash freeze it, then we pull it out, thaw it slightly, and cut it into steaks. And I'm going to show you how much easier and how much nicer the steaks are when you do that. Now what we're going to do is separate the brisket and shank from the chuck. We'll come back to those in a second. We're going to start with some bison arm roast. Now we're going to break the chuck portion away from the neck. We'll work on this here in a second. Bison neck is just going to go into ground meats. Every once in a while you need to, we call it tuning your knife up. So this is just honing. And what honing means is you're taking the edge of your knife and you're realigning it. So you're rolling that edge back into place. It does not remove any material as most people think. So this is not sharpening, it's just honing. So bison brisket. Let's get started removing this bone out of here. Let's remove this breastbone. As you can see, it's so much more lean than beef. Just not a lot of fat on it at all. So you have to be real careful when you barbecue these. You almost have to maybe dump some tallow on it or something as you smoke it so it doesn't dry out. But that's a beef brisket, or excuse me, bison brisket right there. We're gonna cut some bison suit bones off this front shank, and then we'll do something a little bit different with the hind shank. This is just a cross-cut bison suit bone. Got that nice marrow bone in the middle. Typically get 3 off of that front shank. So we'll add those to our table. Let's cut some bison arm roasts. We're gonna save these ribs. Makes a really nice bison short rib. So there's your short rib. We're gonna get 3 boneless arm roasts off of these, and then we're gonna get 2 bone in, and I'll show you the difference. But we're pretty much just gonna, keep in mind we're gonna cut this bison how we would merchandise this in our retail store. So as you follow along through this process, this is what we would call a retail cut bison diagram. So on this roast here, you can see a portion of it has the bone in it. So I'm just going to make a cut, pretty much just cut it in half. So you have a bone-in roast, and then you have a boneless roast. And we'll do the same thing with this one. And then as we add these to the table, Scott's going to be going through and using our bone scraper and removing the little bit of bone dust that's on there from our saw. So there you have 3 boneless and 2 bone-in bison arm roasts. Okay, this is the bison chuck portion. This has the shoulder blade bone in it. We're gonna extract the flat iron steaks, and we're gonna make some boneless chuck roasts. We'll get a rib out of here. But I start by separating this muscle right here on the top. And this is where it can get challenging with bison, because I mentioned earlier how sticky everything gets just because it's lean. And this is where it's really shows how sticky they are. Kind of hard to separate, hard to pull this muscle apart. You just gotta use your fingers and tip of your knife blade and just work your way down through here. And what we're after is that top blade roast so I can make some flat iron steaks. But yeah, it is just hard to pull through here. There we go. I'm going to be saving a hump roast on this bison too, so I'll show you where we get a hump roast and what it looks like. We will be saving the fat. We'll add that up at the end as part of our yield, but we do save bison fat. We save the bones. We save all that stuff because it all has value. Nothing goes to waste. All right, so once we get that done, let's pull this whole top blade roast out. Just take your knife and follow down along that shoulder blade. You can see that bone right there. So I just use the tip of my knife right down along that bone. And you can pull that whole piece out just like that. Pretty cool, huh? Now, just continue. Remove that little bit of that knuckle. This piece right here is the mock tender. We will be saving this, but we'll cut this into some stew meat. It's usually what we use it for, is some stew meat. We're gonna, throughout this process, we're actually gonna go back to our boning table once we get all the cuts out. And Scott and I will work at all the trimmings, and that'll be with the trimmings, and we'll make some stew. So we wanna remove that shoulder blade bone. Get that out of there. So now we want to just remove this muscle that lies right on top of these chuck roasts. Once you get that off of there, we're going to extract this whole chuck eye roll. So this is a bison chuck eye roll with the hump roast attached to it, and I'm gonna cut it down just a little bit more into each individual cuts. Bison chuck eye roll, this is the whole thing. First thing I'm gonna do is remove the remaining portion of this yellow cord that's in here. This patty whack, it's just this big thick piece of gristle. We're gonna get that out of there. Nobody wants that in their pot of bison roast. It'd be pretty hard to chew. So let's just get this out. Once you get that removed, we can then cut our bison boneless chuck roast and our hump roast. So I'm going to use the 10-inch Victorinox for that. So I'm just going to make a cut right down through here. And there you have bison hump roast. I'm actually going to cut this in half, and we'll save two. So there you have two nice bison hump roasts. And then with this, we're just going to go down through and cut some nice 2 to 3 pound boneless bison chuck roast. That is just a fantastic roast. Put some original Bearded Butcher Blend seasoning in your crock pot with your favorite veggies and add some potatoes in, and you've got a hearty meal right there. So there's your boneless bison chuck roast. Before we move these boneless chuck roasts to our table, we're gonna use this nifty netter, and we like to net these. That way when people cook them, you just leave the net right on the roast, and you put these in your crock pot and you add your veggies. That way you can pull this out separate, and you can separate the two if you want. So yeah, we're just gonna net these up and get them added to our table. So as I'm doing this processing, Scott is over here. He's working at setting things up on the table, how he wants to then transfer them to our diagram. So I'm cutting and he's doing that. Before I get to this flat iron, I want to cut one more strip of bison short ribs off of these chuck ribs. The rest of that can go into our trimmings. So you can get one more strip of these, just like that, to add to our pile.
Is walking okay, or do you want me on my knees?
Walking's fine. So I mentioned,
Don't make eye contact.
I mentioned this is one of the, a butcher's secret. So I put this in the freezer, or Alyssa did. As you can see, it's tightened it up real nice. So this is a bison ribeye section. I'm going to show you how much nicer of a steak this makes now that I put it in the freezer. So you can see how beautiful, uniform all of these cuts are now that it's been tightened up a little bit in the flash freezer. Otherwise, everything would have just been real sloppy while you're trying to cut it. So these look like they're being cut with a laser beam now. And the 10-inch Victorinox is just gliding down through there without any trouble. So if you're a butcher out there and you want to know how to keep a more uniform cut on a leaner animal, just flash freeze it. There you have a beautiful stash of bison ribeye steaks heading over to the table. Bison top blade for flat irons. I want to start by removing this membrane, staying as close to that membrane as possible. Remembering here again that bison is very sticky, so this is certainly more challenging than, say, if you were doing beef. Just want to stay as close to that membrane as you can. So the goal here is to leave the less amount of meat as possible on there. So once you get that to this spot, now we want to use the fish fillet method. And there's that gristle strip that we've talked about that runs through these steaks. So you want to just take use the whole length of your blade. Just follow that all the way down. And you just want to separate that muscle from that gristle like that. Do the same thing on this side. And there you have two nice pieces for flat iron steaks. A lot of people want to know why we trim them up like that. And really what it does is it allows you to have a more uniform steak so that when you cook it, it cooks more evenly. So there you have three. And any of those trimmings, those are just going to go into stir fry or ground bison. So I think we'll cut 4 off of this one. So 3 off that first piece and 4 off this one. And there you have some beautiful bison flat irons ready for some steak and eggs. So I mentioned this mock tender, and we're going to cut it into some stew meat. So it's similar to that top blade roast where you just want to remove the membrane. So once you get that membrane removed, it does have gristle that runs through the middle of it like the flat iron. So you want to get that gristle strip out of there, and then we're just gonna chunk this up into some stew meat and add it to our table. With our stew meat, we like maybe 1 inch by 1 inch ish squares, kind of like that, free from a bunch of fat and gristle. But if you cut these into these long strips like this, then what you can do is just come back through and cut all 3 or however many strips you have in one cut, and then you wind up with all these cubes. That's some gorgeous bison stew meat all ready for the table. Let's get it added. So the front quarter of this bison has all been processed. You can see it right here on the table. I have the hind quarter that still needs to be cut, but before I do that, Scott's going to transfer everything that you see from the front quarter onto our diagram table.
Starting off with the soup bones out of that front shank, brisket, arm roast, flat iron, chuck roast, then we got the hump roast, got the ribs, got the skirt steak, got some back ribs, and then I've got rib eyes. Bison stew meat.
If you want the very best, innovative, unique products designed exclusively for food processors, we're the place to come to get those.
Our purpose is to make food companies successful. They don't have to manage hundreds of suppliers, they only have to manage one.
Primarily, our core focus has been on protein, but we also deal in all sorts of areas within food and beverage.
Soup, sauces, dairy, produce, everything related to food safety.
From gloves to knives to packaging, whatever it might be. We have 14 distribution centers across the United States.
That enables us to service nearly every single customer in the U.S.
There's an international logistics team that just watches things like container traffic.
It's about building the best supply chain possible. And how do we prepare Bunzl to be the distributor of choice to service food companies that are indeed feeding the nation?
Bison hind quarter, we're going to start with removing this rose meat. Goes into some ground bison. Get that rose meat off of there. Now we're going to pull this flank. Just want to take this whole muscle off. Just like that. That flank steak is located right here. You can see the shape of it. So start by removing that thick gristle, and then we'll pull this membrane off. The key is just to get it started properly. Once you get it started, you can pull it all the way off of there. Just want to make sure that you don't pull your flank steak in half when you do that. So just get this separated from all this gristle. Once you get that, you can just keep pulling and cutting a little bit as needed. There you have bison flank steak removed from all that fat and gristle. Now what I want to do is just follow this outline right here, like that. Take a little bit of gristle off the top. And there you have a bison flank steak. Using the 8-inch Victorinox breaking knife, you want to pull this knuckle. You want to start by making this cut right here. So once you get that cut started, you follow that femur bone down. This is the round tip, also known as the sirloin tip. Contains the tri-tip. So I'm going to show you how to extract those and cut all those out. You just want to use the tip of your knife and find those seams in that muscle. And just follow that down. Once we get that whole knuckle off of there, now is when we start working at removing the tri-tip. First thing we want to do is remove this cap that contains the tri-tip. So we'll get that set aside. We'll work on that in a second. First, we want to focus on these bison round tips. So I'm going to square this up. That'll get made into some stew meat. And then I'm just going to cut these real nice 2 to 3 pound bison round tip roasts. So there you have 3 beautiful bison round tip roasts, otherwise known as sirloin tips, heading to our table. Bison tri-tip, you can see that muscle is located right inside that fat. We want to remove all this excess. Trim a little bit of this fat off right here. I keep mentioning how dry bison is, and this is where another spot where it can be a little bit more difficult compared to, say beef, just because of how dry these different muscles are. Sometimes you can get this fat started and just use your hands to help pull it off of there. Then what I'll do is I'm going to get my 8-inch breaking knife. I'm just going to use my 8-inch to cut some of this off just because it's so dry. The main reason for getting this off of there is just because when it's cooked, we don't want it to be, chewy for the person that's going to be eating it. So make it look like that. Get a little bit of that gristle off there. Use just a little bit more here on this end. There's a little bit thicker piece of gristle right there. Definitely more challenging than a beef tri-tip, that's for sure. There you have bison tri-tip ready for the smoker. Bison kidney, this will go into our scrap pile. We use those to make some pet food. You can see bison don't have a lot of kidney suet, just a little bit hanging right here, but we will be saving that. So I want to be careful when I remove it, because located right behind that hunk of fat is the bison tenderloin, and we certainly don't want to put a big cut in that tenderloin. This is your whole loin, so you have your short loin and everything in here. This is your tenderloin that we're going to cut into fillets, and then on the back you have your strip loin. We'll cut into some strip steaks. You have your sirloin, and then up here you have the top, bottom, eye around that shank. But the first thing we want to do is we want to find that knuckle right there. You want to separate the sirloin from this round portion. So just make a cut, and then I'll grab my handsaw. Cutting right at the base of that knuckle. There's that loin, and also I should mention that there's the butcher's dollar that we talk about off that ball joint. So with this bison loin, first thing I want to do is I want to get this whole tenderloin removed. So I want to stay right up against that hip bone and then follow this vertebrae all the way down. We'll cut this into some tasty bison fillets. Just remove that whole tenderloin. There's a whole bison tenderloin that we'll trim up. Next thing we want to do, we want to remove the sirloin. So we're removing the sirloin from the strip section. So there you have bison tenderloin, strip loin, and sirloin. So let's start with this bison sirloin. We just want to take the hip bone off of it. We'll cut this into some boneless bison sirloin steaks. Let's do a little bit of pre-trimming on here. What I'll do is I'll get each primal trimmed up ready for cuts, and then we'll go back through and cut each one into individual steaks. So there you have your bison sirloin. Next up is the strip. So in order to cut these strip steaks, you have to break that bone right there so you can go down through and make it boneless by trimming all this excess bone off of here. Then we'll go down through, sort of like a rib section, where you trim the bottoms of these vertebrae bones off. Just get each one trimmed out. And then we can cut all of these pieces into some steaks. So once that's done, go back through, take these little bones off. Now we have a strip loin ready for steak. So we have sirloin, strip loin, next up tenderloin. So with this tenderloin, this has the chain and everything on it. So we want to remove this chain. So we'll remove the chain, and then we're gonna take all the silver skin off the top. Usually with this, if you just get it started, you can pull the rest of it off pretty easily. So once that's done, just remove a little bit of this fat here. Now let's remove this silver skin. Just want to stay nice and close to that gristle. That way you're not cutting into your fillets. Just take all this off there. Just a little bit more right here. We're just going to go down through. We're going to cut the tenderloin, strip loin, and the sirloin, and then we'll move those over onto our table. But these we typically shoot for about an 8-ounce fillet portion. Just a real nice sized portion for merchandising. Just like that. Some beautiful bison fillets. Look how gorgeous those are. Wow. Wouldn't mind putting one of those in my skillet. Next up, I'm gonna get the 10-inch Tornox. We're gonna cut some bison strip steaks. So typically we cut these about a nice heavy 1 to 1.25 inches. That's what our customers like in our store. So we just cut these nice bison strip steaks. You can usually get away with cutting the strip loin without putting it in the freezer like I did the rib section, just because it's usually a lot more firm than that ribeye section is. Any of these trimmings you see on the end are going to get made into some nice stew meat. So there you have a beautiful batch of bison strip steaks. Just absolutely gorgeous. Next up is the sirloin. So the sirloin actually has a little bit of the picanha on it, but we trim a little bit of that off when we make our first cut for our steaks. We don't typically save the picanha on bison. Just doesn't merchandise well for us. A lot of folks in our area don't really know what it is or what they would use it for, so we leave that sirloin cap on our steaks. We just go down through and cut these dandy sirloins. Some of these are big enough that would maybe feed 2 people depending on what kind of appetite you have, but those are fantastic. You can see the different sizes. We go down through that muscle as it gets smaller down here at the end. So there you have bison sirloins, bison strip steaks, and bison fillets, all ready to head over to our table. Onto this bison round. So in this portion, we're going to do Thor's hammer out of this hind shank. So I'll show you that here in a second. So we'll cut a Thor's hammer out of that. And then this one we want to just make it all boneless. This is the entire bison round. We start by removing this H bone. So I'll get that oyster steak out of there. Now I just want to follow down along this H bone. Go to that knuckle. And just pull that H bone all the way out. Once we get those removed, do just a little bit of pre-trimming here from that dry aging where it's discolored a little bit. Take a little bit of that gristle off, just like that. Now we can remove our femur. So just go down along the one side, back and forth down along the other. And just pull that whole femur bone out. So once we get the bones out of it, now we can separate this down into all the different muscle structures. Let's remove this heel first. So this, some places save this as a roast, but we're just going to make it into some ground bison. Just follow that seam, pull that heel out of there. So now that we have that heel removed, now what I want to do is I want to separate this down into the 3 main muscle structures, which are the top, bottom, and eye of round. So I'm going to take the top round off first. So this is the top, this is the eye, and this is the bottom. So you can see there's a seam right here. I just want to follow that seam. That's the top round. Now we're going to do the same thing here. There's another seam. So we'll just follow the seam out. This is the eye of round. So there's the eye of round. And then this is the top round. Now what we're going to do is we're just going to go down through each individual portion. And we're going to cut them down just a little bit further. So working on this bottom round, there's a piece of gristle that runs through right here. We typically don't use this muscle for jerky. You can, just not as desirable. We like using this portion of the bottom round Just want to remove this outer layer of dark material here from dry aging. Bison don't have that cover fat, so when they hang in the cooler, the outside just, it darkens up quite a bit. So do that. That portion is going to be for jerky. This is the eye of round, so we're just going to cut this into a couple nice roasts. So there you have a couple real nice bison eye of round roasts. Now we'll move on to that top round. You want to get this, there's a vein right here, you kind of want to get, just got to go in there just a little bit further to get that, cut that vein out of there. And we want to remove any of that connective tissue here on the top. A little bit of gristle down here on the bottom, a little silver skin. So I'm going to start by cutting a couple London, real nice London broils off this, and then the remaining portion I'll use for some jerky. So there you have a whole bison top round with the cap on it. So next step is I'll just cut a couple London broils. We're gonna square this up. This portion right here that I'm cutting off, that'll get made into some jerky. And then we want to cut a couple nice London broils just all the way through, just like that. Just a couple dandies. So we're going to cut 2 of those. Those are cut about 2 inches thick. Just make real nice roast. Just gorgeous. So once those are cut, the remaining portion, I'll show you, we're going to cut into some strips for jerky. The round definitely makes, portions of the round make the best jerky, so that's why we use it. But that first piece I trimmed off, that'll get made into some jerky. And then the remaining portion of this top round will get made into some jerky. And I start by removing this cap because you don't want this type of stuff in your jerky. You just want this nice, lean, pure lean muscle. So just start like that. Now I'm going to get my 10-inch knife. We're going to cut these nice chunks because we want to cut against the grain. So you can see the grains are going this way. So I'm cutting it against the grain here. And then I'll show you when I lay this down on the table and I cut my jerky, all my jerky strips will be against the grain. Same with this bottom round. Cutting it, so the grains are going this way, so I'm cutting it against the grain, just like that. Now what I can do, this is those slices off the bottom rounds, I can just go down through and cut these into jerky strips. And you can see that the grains are now running across the strip. It just makes it easier to eat when you take it out of the package and you chomp on it. It's easier to pull the strips apart when they're cut against the grain. Just go down through, work down through my pile. Last piece of this bison top round cut into jerky. And then once I get all of this added to my stash, we're going to get it added to the table. And then I'm left with one piece that's sitting on the saw, and that's a Bison Thor's hammer. So get this finished. There's our pile of bison jerky. We'll get that added to the table. Now let's cut a Bison Thor's hammer. So you probably have seen our beef video that we did with the Thor's hammer. Pretty similar process, other than it's bison. So we just start by cutting around all the way around that shank bone, and then we just remove the meat on the top of this bone all the way around, Cleaning it up just a little bit. Cooked low and slow over your smoker. Seasoned up with maybe some Bearded Butcher black seasoning. This makes some fantastic barbecue, makes some barbacoa, makes some tacos. But that, folks, is a Bison Thor's hammer. That wraps up all the processing on the front and the hind. Let's get this moved over onto our table. Scott's gonna move it to the diagram table, and then we're gonna get started on our trimming process on the boning table of the trimmings for ground meats.
Flank steak, tri-tip, sirloin, tip roast, tenderloin, strip steak, sirloin steak, London broil, strips for jerky, eye around, and my Thor's hammer. Meat and spices have gone together for centuries, and for over a decade, the Bearded Butchers have been formulating, blending spices that we started out using in our butcher shop, and now we've offered them for sale. 11 different unique blends and 2 sauces. We sell it in both shaker size and in large 4-pound bag sizes. We know that these spices are going to be great for not just meats, but for anything that you can think to put them around your household. So please go to www.beardedbutchers.com, check out our offerings. We're also into many of your retailers nationwide, so look for the Bearded Butcher blend spices on a store shelf near you. Seth's done a beautiful job getting us everything cut out from this entire half a bison, front quarter and hind quarter. These are all the packaged, this is all that will be packaged for our store, all the individual cuts. Behind us now is basically everything that wasn't to cut. This now has to be gone through carefully by hand, as we always do, and we're going to remove any of the, or all of the bone, any connective tissue gristle, and a little bit of the fat, of course glands or any bloody bits. We're going to separate that to just the boneless muscle that we're going to have for our grindings, and then we'll be able to tell you exactly how much was the packaged portion of the individual cuts, how much of it will be the trimmings portion that can be ground up, and then how much was essentially waste.
Now, we wouldn't be able to do this boning process without the ultimate boner of the operation. And he's standing over here. So he's been chomping at the bit, waiting to get on the table and get to work. So we're gonna help him assist, but we're gonna get to boning.
Ironically, I just came in from feeding the live
We've got all of the nice lean whole muscle separated from the bones, and the fat, excess fat, and the bits that we do not include in our ground meat because they're nasty little bits that are gristle, and we put those into pet food. But I'm just going to lay out all outside of the diagram. I'm going to lay out all the stuff that's not the individual cuts. So over there's all the bones and stuff that's not really going to be usable. I mean, we could sell the bones. We do sell the bones, but it's not really a consumable. Whereas here we're just laying out all of these nice lean trimmings that can be ground up into beautiful ground bison, bratwurst, hot dogs, snack sticks, all kinds of lovely stuff. So here are your total yield numbers. The bison hanging carcass weight, hot hanging carcass weight, just after it's slaughtered, goes into the cooler. That weighed 349 pounds. When the front and hind, that entire half came out of the cooler, it weighed 338.75 pounds. That was 10.25 pounds of evaporation loss, 3%. That's not bad. That's just what happens when you dry age a carcass. We are then left with a total of the individual package cuts. Beautiful, mostly boneless. These are ready to be sold in our retail store, 134.5 pounds. We have 128 pounds, this pile right here, which is all the beautiful, hand-trimmed, boneless, ready to be ground into burgers, patties, bratwurst, hot dogs, you name it, 128 pounds. That's going to give us a total of 262.5 pounds of actual eating or sellable product, which is a phenomenal yield. That's just over 75% of the hot carcass hanging weight wound up ready for resale. Phenomenal. Another reason why we love Bison. The only thing left over after that would have been some pet food, which is bits that came out of here that we refuse to put into our grind because they're nasty bits. They don't belong in human food. And then bones, of course. Those were 76.25 pounds total. The pet food and the bones together weighed 76.25 pounds. So another way of looking at it, the only thing that is not packaged eating meat from this 349-pound side of bison was 76.25 pounds. Phenomenal, again. So there's your yield. Another reason why we love bison, they produce phenomenal eating meat at high yields.
Bison diagram video, it's all right here on our table. We have all of the cuts from a front quarter, which some of those are your ribeye steaks, your chuck eye roasts, some stew meat, ribs, brisket, things like that. On the hind quarter, we have some strip steaks, fillets, tri-tip, flank, round tip, some London broil, sirloin, Thor's hammer. You can see it right here on the table. We have all of our trimmings lined up. We have all the bones, some scraps for pet food. So you see it all right here on the table. This was a fun one. What do you think, Scott?
Yeah, one of my big takeaways with bison is that we should, as you would expect, we have the higher yield. So you saw what the yield was from the carcass hanging weight to what we actually have as packaged eating meat, mostly boneless eating meat. That's one of the big takeaways for me with bison is the fact that it's such a great animal, so resource friendly in the sense that they use less resources to raise than beef, and then you get a bigger bang for your buck with the yield.
This is impressive. So I mentioned that going back to the beef diagram cutting video that we did, how much more impressive the bison is due to that yield that Scott's talking about. So this was a fun one. So hopefully you guys enjoyed yet another video as part of our diagram series. We enjoyed making them. If you could, hit that subscribe button. We appreciate every single one of you. We're heading for 3 million subscribers right here on YouTube. And don't forget the other channels as well, Instagram, Facebook, you know the drill. Head over to beardedbutchers.com, maybe grab something for your taste buds. We'd sure appreciate that too. So until next time, see ya.